Thanks for coming. This is Microsoft Excel 101.
Take out your laptop.
Right. Thanks for coming. This is Entrepreneurs Roundtable 115. Does anybody know what 115 is? It's like a random number or? Exactly. Number of events we've done so far. This is the 115th event. And we actually started 10 years ago. And here's the story. Like, first meeting, just a bunch of entrepreneurs around the round table. Second meeting, Albert Wenger from Unisquare Ventures joined. And in the second meeting, Albert said to me, "Oh, you should invite my friend, Gil Beta." So Gil was in Entrepreneurs Roundtable 3. And then you were in like, I don't know, like 25, something. And now it's great to have him back for 115. I'm very excited. So Gil actually started and sold many large businesses. So he has great experience and he's been investing. Great person to know. And tonight we'll get to know more about his background, how he got here, and more importantly, what he invests in, what he's looking for. And as always, he has a bag somewhere full of cash.
Yeah, I always know that.
So yeah, he's gonna throw cash at you if he likes your pitch. So we have 5 startups that we picked. I'm very excited about them. They're gonna come here and pitch to Gil, and Gil will give them feedback. Then at the end, if there's time, we are going to pick randomly, not randomly, with questions, one more startup to come up here and pitch. So just who here would be very brave enough to come up here and pitch at the end, willing to pitch? Great, I love it. Just think, but it's going to be a great chance. So we'll start with Gil's background introduction. By the way, thanks to Microsoft for hosting us. I think it's been 4 years. Is anyone from Microsoft here? Do you have any friends at Microsoft? Tell them I said thank you. Thank you. And also tonight, so after the introduction, we'll do a Q&A. You can ask Gil specific questions. I think you, like on Twitter, you said, come talk to me about blockchain. So, yeah, feel free.
Yeah.
After that, we have the pitches. After the pitches, we'll pick one more company. And after that, we'll hang out here a little bit. And then we'll go across the street, some people, for a couple of drinks, or maybe like 10, or 1, or 0. So thanks for coming again, and I'm very excited to introduce Gil. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Murat. I really appreciate the invitations. You always have an awesome crowd here. Can't wait to pick up my check, right, as I walk out for all the admission fees. Thank you all for coming. A little bit about my background is I was a technologist for about 10 years. And was a software engineer and wrote code. As some of our friends know, I lived in Brussels, I lived in Hong Kong for a while. And then in about 1995, I started my first company, was founder CTO of a company called Real Media, which is in the advertising technology space. Real Media was acquired in 2001. Then I jumped on board with my co-founder again in a company called Dakota, again in the ad tech space, which sold in 2007. And then I jumped on board with Comcast. So in addition to being CTO at Dakota, I was also head of corp dev, ran our fundraising process, which we didn't end up taking. So we got acquired, through that process, met the Comcast Ventures guys. At the time, and this was 07, 08, they weren't doing any early stage seed investing. So we decided to form a fund together called Genicast. So Genicast, I've been running Genicast for almost 10 years now. It's a seed stage fund that invests up to $1 million in early stage, primarily B2B tech companies based in the Northeast. I'm happy to talk to you about all the wonderful companies we invested in, maybe some that are not so wonderful. And then also last year, in addition to doing Genicast, the $1 million checks through Genicast, I joined Comcast Ventures as a partner to do the 2 to 20 million size investments. So now I can write the $1 million checks and up to the $20 million checks. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit tonight about sort of the types of companies that I find interesting, what's sort of the process that I go through in investing, and how do I pick a company, and then maybe talk to you a little bit about some of the portfolio companies that I've invested in, some that have done well, maybe some that haven't done so well. So just to give you a little perspective on my day-to-day, last year at Genicast we saw 700 deals, and we met with probably 50% of those companies, so 350 companies. Out of those companies, we invested in one. So one is not a typical year. Sometimes we invest up to 3. Sometimes we invest 0. So the good news there is there are only 2 investors in the fund in Genicast. I'm an investor in the fund personally, and Comcast is an investor in the fund. It's a little unique fund in that we don't have typical LPs. So it's an evergreen fund, and we can be patient. So some years where we see a lot of exciting companies, we can write a bunch of checks, and in some years where we don't see any interesting companies, we don't have to write a check. So we're very particular, and we have to really be in love with the company in order to make an investment. So how do we fall in love with a company? So first off, it starts off with a great introduction. I receive a lot of emails from info@genicast.com or hello@genicast.com or whatever. We keep changing it, so that the spam bots don't find it. But those are probably the most difficult introductions because there's no connection with the company. And basically, a company that just emails me, there's no filtering going on. There's no criteria that have been put on that company. There's no way for me to immediately, without even reading the company, know that there's potential in this company, that it could be interesting. If it's introduced to me through a service provider, like lawyer, accountant, what have you, through my network, through entrepreneurs I funded, even better, right? They usually do at least a minimum level of diligence. Oh, these guys, are real, or they have a deck, or they know how to pitch, or I don't know, whatever that at least minimum criteria is. Maybe they met with the company and it's a little bit higher. Maybe they know the company. Maybe they're working with the company. And so at least there's a level of diligence, so the bar has been raised a little bit, and so that's why those companies are a little bit more interesting. So, number one is try to get an intro. I am readily available. I come to events like this. I have a vast network in this area. Everybody here is probably one step away from getting in contact with me. And probably you all know Murat. And if Murat emails me, I will definitely look at that company. So there you go. That's what you get for inviting me, because you get a bunch of spam tomorrow. So the second thing that we look at is the team. A lot of people say that oh, we got to have a good team. But what does it mean to have a good team? For me, I like to paraphrase Thomas Edison when he said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. I think a startup is much the same in that it's 1% a good idea and 99% perspiration. It's execution. So the first thing I look at is, can this team, does this team have the makeup? Do they have the experience? Do they have the network in order to execute this company? I mean, we all have great ideas. I have great ideas all the time. Things that I absolutely have no ability to execute. And the difference between me and a real company is somebody who can take an idea and who can execute that idea. And for each company, it's different. For spaces that require a lot of domain expertise, are there specialized spaces? I'd like to know, to know that the team either comes from that space, or they know the space really well, or they operate a business in that space, or something. For other businesses where they're disrupting the status quo, maybe it's less important that they understand the existing business models and relationships, because they're going to blow it all up. But it's important that the team not only has a vision for the company, but also has a vision to execute the company. And we also look at, of course, we look at the idea. Like, what are they building here? We look at, given that I have a technology background, I like to see companies that have interesting technology. They're solving a hard problem using hard technology. There are very few opportunities that companies have for building defensibility, competitive advantages. And so one way is by solving a really hard problem and doing it in a different way than the traditional players. So we'll look at what problem are you solving? How are you solving that? Is there some defensibility? And what are the competitive advantages that you have to solving that problem? And then we'll also look at the competitive landscape. So how are people solving that problem today? Is it a new problem? Is it a problem that people don't know that they have, so you have to educate them and then sell them a solution? Or is it a problem today and people need a solution, but existing solutions just don't work? And oftentimes, paper and pencil or Excel is the competition. And it's important to understand and not minimize the difficulty that people have for moving from an existing solution to a problem to a new solution. So we look at the competitive landscape, and then we look at some of the sort of intricate workings of the company, right? So how much money do they need? How much runway does that give them? What are the milestones that they're looking to hit? So very sort of kind of tactical things. Okay, you're asking for $1 million or $2 million or $500,000, whatever the amount is. How is the company going to use the money? Do they have a good plan? What's their hiring plan? What is their projected customer acquisition? And by the way, this is all around more B2B enterprise type companies, which is what I focus on. The consumer type companies, there are a lot of other different things that you look at there, and it's not my specialty, so I'm probably not the guy to comment on those types of companies. But so we look at their financial model, their hiring plan. So we want to understand the connection between, okay, we give you the cash, and now what are you going to do with that? How is that going to accelerate your business? How's it going to allow you to hit those milestones? And whatever those milestones are, right? So in some cases, the problem you're solving, the technological problem you're solving, is really difficult. So there's a high risk on the technology. So maybe for some companies, the only thing you're going to do on $1 million is show that you can build a solution to solve the problem. Right? In other cases, it's not the technology, it's customer acquisition. It's like, how do we find these customers? So maybe the milestone is around acquiring customers or acquiring customers at a particular cost. Or it's around revenue. Yeah, you can find those customers, but nobody's really going to pay a lot for the solution. So maybe the risk there is around how much will they pay. So in that case, you want to look at, what are the assumptions you made about the company to be successful, and then you're trying to de-risk the business. You're trying to prove those assumptions. You can build the technology. You can go to market. You can get customers. You can get them to pay. And these days, Series A investors, which are the investors after the seed, they are raising the bar because there are a lot more companies that are getting funded at the seed stage. And so the Series A guys, they can be a lot more choosy and they can wait. and wait for you to get more revenue, more customers, more whatever. And then sort of the final question that we ask is really around, what is the exit potential for this company? So you're creating a lot of value, which is awesome, and you're probably making a lot of customers happy, and you're employing a lot of people, all great things. But our model is based upon there being an exit. And most likely it's not an IPO. There are a small number of companies that IPO, that even have the capability of being a multi-hundred million, billion-dollar company and IPO. So we're looking at more rational strategies or more probable strategies around, okay, you're creating a valuable asset, but to whom will it be valuable? Who will be the acquirer? Who will be the company that says, I need this team, or I need this technology, or I need your customers, or I need product to put into my existing pipeline, or this is a space that I need to expand into. And for a team that knows their space, they should be able to come up with a half dozen different potential acquirers. Companies that are in the space, around the space, want to be in the space, are being disrupted by the space, have cash, have done acquisitions before. So it's important in our model that there is an exit. And by no means, it's not something that we want the company to focus on. It's not one of the top priorities that a company, as they're executing the business, they have to think about, okay, I want to build this business to be acquired by this company here. No, that's not the purpose of it. The purpose of it is just to understand what type of business are we building here. And some businesses won't get acquired, and will be a great company, and could throw off millions of dollars in cash, and you can have another house and a car and an airplane and all those things. But that might not be a venture model company or venture fundable company, because we have a very particular model that we invest in X number of companies. Some of those companies go out of business. Some of them just return the capital, and then those small number of companies actually return multiples upon exit, and that's where we're able to pay back the fund and returns to our investors. So that's sort of the model that we work in. The spaces that I invest in are all B2B, as I said, B2B enterprise, anything with hard technology, IoT, cybersecurity, doing a bunch in blockchain, almost anything where there's hard technology, I find that interesting. Company that maybe you don't find interesting, but that I invested in last year is actually in the trucking logistics space, called DrayNow. And it's probably not a company that any of you know about here. Even if they get really big, nobody in this room will know about them. It's very difficult for me at cocktail parties to get people excited about this company, right? Where if I said, oh yeah, I invested in Dollar Shave Club. Oh, Dollar Shave, I love that company, that's awesome. Fortunately, I don't do those type of investments. And so DrayNow is in the shipping logistics company. What they do is they solve the problem of getting a shipping container from a rail yard. So the shipping container just came off a train, from the rail yard to the warehouse, sort of the last 50-mile problem, and then get it back. That's it. Not super exciting. Just happens to be an $8 billion market opportunity, right, that none of us has heard about. And so what attracted me about this problem was, first off, when you get into it and you meet the founders and each of the three founders have between 15 and 20 years experience in this space here. So they know everything there is to know about the space, which is good, it's comforting, they've been in the space, they know it down pat. But it turns out to be a really interesting problem. Today, in order for a broker who sort of owns a container to get that moved to hauled on a truck to the warehouse, they do it today in very traditional fashions with email and faxes and phones and things like that. Highly inefficient market. There's little to no planning that goes involved. Like you can't say, okay, how many trucks do you need next week or the week after or the week after, right? There's not a lot of optimization that is done. And yet, it's a business that is profitable. There are a lot of companies in this business. And the number one job title in 23 states is truck driver. There are something like 4 million truck drivers in the US. It's a big business. And there's an opportunity to create a marketplace similar to Uber for trucking. The Uber has Uber for trucking. That's a separate story. They're focused on long haul, so coast to coast trucking. These guys are just focused on the last 50 miles. And which is, the truck driver has an app. The broker posts a load. The driver goes in, looks at all the different loads and say, I'll take that one, and then goes, picks up the load, delivers it, and everybody's happy. You need to, not just anybody can pick up these loads here, so there is a screening process, but it's essentially that. And I found that super interesting. There are a lot of market dynamics in the business. How do you get drivers excited about changing the way that they traditionally got loads to this new way of picking up loads? How do you get brokers excited about inputting their loads into a new system as opposed to using their old system? There's a lot of sort of inertia and legacy around the way folks are doing business today. So that was one business the one business that we invested in last year. We've invested in companies, a mobile security company that we invested in a number of years ago called Enterploy, changed their name to Divide. That were 3 founders, one in New York, one in London, one in Hong Kong, and says, hey, we think that it's silly when you go to your company and you have your personal phone and you have your work phone, right? And how many people here that work for a company that makes you carry 2 phones? There you go. There are a lot of companies that do that. I have 2 phones here, and a lot of companies do that. And so these guys said, well, that's kind of silly. Why don't we just create sort of a virtual persona, work and personal persona inside one phone. Great idea, and they eventually were acquired by Google. I'm still waiting to see that feature in Android. I've been promised it for a few years now because I'm carrying 2 phones. We've invested in companies in the ad tech space that were acquired by Adobe. When it comes to acquisition, I know you're not thinking about acquisition now because you're at the early stages of your company, but something to remember, keep in the back of your mind is that acquisitions don't normally don't start in the corporate development group. So the corporate development group is the group that does all the acquisitions. It usually starts in the business development group, where you have some sort of relationship with the company, you're partners in some way, there's some sort of operating relationship, and then the business development guys say, oh wow, we love this company so much, and then they introduce you to the corporate development side. So something to think about as you're building your company, maybe not now, but maybe in the future, is to think about, okay, remember that list that I created for Gil a few years ago on potential acquirers? It might be good to begin reaching out and forming business relationships with some of those companies so that when you're ready, when you're at scale, when those acquirers are ready, that you already have those relationships in place. Yeah, so the question was, how did I meet, Dranow, the trucking logistics company? They were introduced to me by their temporary CFO. So I actually know somebody who knows that CFO, and this person introduced me to the CFO saying, oh, the CFO does a bunch of early stage companies, you should just meet him, somebody good to know. And so I was talking with him and told him a little bit about the fund and how I invest, and he says, oh, these are the types of companies that we invest in, and so, oh, by the way, there's one company that I'm working with that is looking to raise. And he mentioned the company, said, oh, well, that sounds interesting, I'll meet with them. Had an hour meeting with the team that turned into 4 hours, and the rest is history. So again, those the introduction, it's not the most important thing, but it is important. Yes, question.
The rest is history. That's the important thing. How long you took from the back meeting to give them a check?
So how long did it take from the first meeting till writing the check? So this was a little bit of an aberration. It took probably 4 months. That's a little bit longer than normal. Normally it takes a couple months before we get to know the team and do our diligence and all that. The reason why this took a little bit longer is because it was a space I knew nothing about. And there are a lot of so-called experts in the intermodal trucking space. That's the sector that these guys are in. And when you take a deep dive into trucking, intermodal, and all that, you find folks, since it's such a big market, so it's part of a $100 billion market, the whole trucking space, that when you start to dig in, you start to find all these experts that are experts in long haul, or they're expert in rail, or they're expert in this part or that part. So it took us a while to find the experts who could educate us on the market dynamics in this space. So if it's a niche space, even though it's a big market, it may take us a little bit longer to get comfortable. Other questions? Yes.
Beyond the financials, in terms of due diligence, what's the typical scenario for you?
So our due diligence process is, so we will look at the financials, but we'll look more at the inputs to the financial system, the financial model that you create, than the output, right? So I want to know the assumptions that you're making. That's more important. In order for me to get into your brain and understand your thinking, I want to look at those assumptions. Like, how many customers do you think you can get? How much will each of the customers pay for it? How many salespeople you're hiring? What's the productivity of your salespeople? Whatever assumptions you make, that's super important in the financial model. The outputs on, it's anybody's guess, especially at the seed stage. So look at the financial model. We'll also try to understand the space, the industry you're in, speak to industry experts. Everything that you said about your industry, we're going to try to double check and triangulate that what you said was correct. Mind you, we're writing $1 million check, and maybe we've known you for 2 months. So every interaction, every data point you give us, every conversation we have, every fact, quote unquote fact that you give us, right? The importance of it is magnified greatly. It's not like we've known each other for a number of years and we have a relationship, and right? We're taking like a 5-year relationship. I wouldn't even give people I know 5 years $1 million, but okay, let's say, right? So we're compressing that whole relationship here into 2 months. And so a simple data point like, hey, who are your competitors, right? And you give me a list of 2 competitors, right? It's like nobody else is doing what we're doing. If I find another company that is similar to your company, and you're supposed to be the expert, and I'm just sort of passing by and I find it, that to me is an important data point. Now, it might not be a deal killer, but it's certainly a yellow flag to say, okay, maybe they weren't super thorough when looking at the competitive landscape, and so now I got to question all the other data points. Maybe they weren't as thorough with those other ones. So we'll do that. We'll do references on the team. So we'll call your third grade teacher. We'll call your former boss. You'll give us 3 references, which will be amazing, and we'll find 10 other references through our network or through those people. Oh, yes, Bob gave me this reference here. Who else did he work with? And then they'll give me another reference and another reference. So we'll try to get a picture of the team. And again, it doesn't all have to be positive. Hopefully there are no axe murderers in there. But not everybody is perfect. And for us, and this speaks to not only about the founding team, but the business in general. Right? There is no perfect business. It's all about balancing the risk and reward. We don't avoid risk. We embrace risk, but we want to understand the risk. We want to understand, okay, if we're, going to war with this entrepreneur in this space, with this team and all, we want to know what are their strengths and also what are their weaknesses, and maybe we can help with their weaknesses. Maybe if it's in hiring, maybe we can help in the hiring. If it's technical, maybe we can find them a CTO. If it's what have you, we can mentor. We can bring in a mentor, a CEO mentor or a CTO mentor. Right. So it's important to know that. So it's really around sort of the opportunity, the team. We'll look at the financials, and we'll also sometimes, look at the technology and try to understand if, is the technology, is it unique? Are they doing something special? Are they doing something hard? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, can you tell us how you make the decision to invest in a company? What's a factor that tells you this is an idea I want to invest in?
So how do we decide what's the idea that we want to invest in? So it's really the reverse. It's I don't know the idea. I threw out a whole bunch of different sectors that I invest in, right? But it's really, I have to hear the idea, see the idea, meet the team before I can understand whether this is something that would be interesting to me. So I've seen tons of companies in the advertising space or in the fintech space or blockchain, right? And so they're in a space that I was super interested in, that I knew something about, but didn't make an investment because it wasn't the right opportunity or the right team or coach, what have you. Yeah.
What are some of the companies / projects in the blockchain space that you personally find exciting?
So the blockchain space is super interesting. We're investors. I'm an investor from a technology point of view. I think the blockchain technology is super interesting. Now, for all of you millennials here who have cryptocurrency in your portfolio, just plug your ears, but I could care less if it goes from $10,000 to $10, right? We would still be excited about the technology. We think it's disruptive. It has the potential to disrupt many businesses, to create new business models, to accelerate existing business models. So we think that where the internet was awesome at connecting people, creating almost zero cost for distribution, right? There still was a need for aggregators in the middle to create that trust layer there between buyer and seller, between a media creator and a consumer, right? We think that blockchain has the ability to create this trust layer on the internet that has the potential to disrupt a lot of these aggregator businesses in the middle. So super excited about the technology. Think that it is really early days. We're just thinking about what is our ICO strategy. So an ICO is an initial coin offering. It's somewhat equivalent to an IPO, initial public offering. It's, minus the revenue, minus the team, minus the tech, minus the product, plus a white paper. So there's a little joke for you guys who understand the space a little bit. And so we think that there are some interesting companies and business models that are being formed around these token economies. We have invested in a fund that holds tokens called Blockchain. So we invest in those guys. They have a bunch of token investment. And we've also invested in an accelerator. I love accelerators. This is the best accelerator, but the second best accelerator is one called MState that is just focused on blockchain. And we're about to close a direct investment in a blockchain infrastructure company that hopefully closes within the next couple weeks. So we think there's a lot of opportunity. We're seeing a lot of interesting companies. I think the valuations are a little bit high. I'm not exaggerating. Their valuations are super high compared to a normal company with that much traction or no traction. And so I think there's going to be a reckoning. One, in that there's probably a rationalization of these cryptocurrency pricing. And then also, I think there's a lot of regulation that we're going to see around it. And I think that's good news because real businesses will be able to survive regulation and rational pricing and all. And maybe that's a better time for us to jump in there. Yes?
An ideal candidate, you would expect certain requirements. What would you require from an ideal candidate?
Yeah, so what does an ideal candidate look like? So if you look at my portfolio, it's all over the place. So it's people in their mid-20s, people who are in their 40s, people who have 20 years experience in the space, people who maybe have a couple years or a few years experience in the space, folks who have a little bit of traction, they have a product build, some folks who have just a PowerPoint presentation, just a CEO and a PowerPoint. That was actually a company that we founded the CTO, and they later exited. It was a great return. So it's difficult to say, but ideally, it's, as I mentioned before, somebody who is an expert in whatever space that they're in. So
Thank you so much.
You're
That's
welcome.
great. Thank you. So again, I'm very excited to have Gil here. As you've seen, he started companies, he's sold companies, now he's investing his own money in Comcast Evergreen Fund. So it's a great opportunity for these companies to come up here and pitch. And I'm excited about these 5 really great companies. The first one is QI Analysis, Ruhul Kudus. Here you go. You have 4 minutes, and good luck.